Is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Are we witnessing the most bizarre presidential election in American history? Our guest tonight will help us navigate one of the most consequential races of our lifetime. Then, do municipalities have the financial supports they need to be sustainable? Nam Kiwanuka, in conversation with officials from the Association of Municipalities of Ontario Conference, will give us their perspective. That's tonight on the agenda. The battle between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump is unlike any other race in U.S. history. And before their showdown at tomorrow night's debate, we thought we'd take a look at what is making this particular election so unprecedented. Here to give us their insights, we welcome, in Washington, D.C., Vivian Salama, national politics reporter for the Wall Street Journal. And with us here in studio, Tim Nossel, Professor Emeritus at the Center for International and Defense Policy at Queen's University. He's also the author of Canada Alone, Navigating the Post-American World. And Andrew Coyne is here, columnist, of course, for the Globe and Mail. And it's great to have you two back here in our studio. And Vivian, nice to have you on our program. And let's put you to work right away. My goodness, the last couple of months, an assassination attempt, the head of the Secret Service steps down, the president stands down from running for a second term, a new candidate seamlessly takes over. Is this the most unprecedented election in American history?
Every election, Steve, feels like the most unprecedented election in American history. I was watching a documentary about 1968 over the weekend, and that seemed pretty unprecedented at the time. And even looking back, it was pretty extraordinary. So obviously, we have a set of circumstances here that are quite extraordinary. We have an incumbent president who stepped down from running for re-election, a former president turned GOP nominee that was shot, albeit, just kind of grazed on the ear, thankfully. Survived that, but still quite extraordinary. And a vice president who stepped up and in no time at all has really garnered enormous support and enthusiasm from her party. All that is to say that it is definitely one that we are going to remember. And certainly we are 56 days from Election Day, but who's counting? We're really going to see how it goes. There's something that we talk about here in Washington, the October surprise. We're all holding our breath for everything that's happened this year. If there's still an October surprise to come, God help us all. But it's definitely been a pretty extraordinary year.
Andrew, we've already had the July surprise, the August surprise. I'm sure there's going to be a September surprise. Can you recall an election in your lifetime with these kinds of circumstances?
None, and I don't think any in American history, partly because of the singular figure of Trump. You've never had a president who's not only a career criminal, but a convicted criminal candidate, I should say, who's been a convicted criminal, a serial fraud artist, a serial abuser of women, essentially a malignant narcissist who's attempted to bring down the system of government, who's attempted to undermine the system of law.
Get off the fence and tell me what you really think.
All those qualities of him in particular. And then, of course, the stakes in this election, I think, are certainly since Lincoln, perhaps, I think are the largest. That I think it is very clear that if Trump is reelected, the democratic system of government and the rule of law in America will be under serious threat.
You agree with that, Kim?
Absolutely. This is an unprecedented election because of the stakes involved. And the stakes aren't only, as Andrew has said, in the domestic politics of the United States, but also in foreign policy, too. If Trump is elected in November, the impact on the global system is going to be just immense. And so from that point of view, it's absolutely unprecedented.
Vivian, based on what you have seen since the new players were put in place, meaning Harris and Walz, and based on your understanding of what you expect to see over the next 56 days, do you think this election is going to be decided on policy differences among the candidates or more on all-out character attacks, which are also happening in abundance?
There definitely are people out there who do want to hear about policy, and at the end of the day, those are the issues that are going to really impact, anyone's view on either candidate. It's really the burden is on Harris at this point to really establish herself, to make help the American people understand what she stands for. Is she a continuation of Biden? Does she break with him on certain policies? And if so, what? Also, something that we are going to be hearing a lot about on Tuesday night at the debate is whether how she switched her position on certain key issues in this election, particularly fracking, which is huge in places like Pennsylvania, a critical swing state, and on Medicare for All, where she is flip-flopped on that as well. We saw a CNN interview a couple of weeks ago where she said that her values haven't changed, but she really hadn't explained fully how that evolution took place. And so a lot of people really anxious to hear about that. But ultimately, a lot of this is about personality. There are very few Americans who don't have a pre-established view of Donald Trump at this point. They either love him or hate him. They might vote for him, but not really care for his rhetoric. Everybody has an opinion about Donald Trump here in the United States and probably around the world. So, for him, it's really about just not saying anything to blow it with key demographics that he needs, most specifically women, suburban white women especially. And that's where the Democrats start pushing the issue of abortion and reproductive rights in general, a very contentious issue where they want to highlight him as someone who's going to essentially rob them of those rights. And so that's when the issues come in. And Harris, especially on Tuesday night, is going to be looking to poke the bear a little bit on some of those issues so that she can provoke some sort of erratic response from him, where you could kind of highlight these policy differences.
All right, let's pursue that. Andrew, let's get away from the mudslinging for a second and just look at the policy differences. Which are those that you believe are the most germane that could result in the win or loss either way?
Well, we have to understand, first of all, how few voters will actually decide this election, right? It just comes down to 7 swing states. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, and Georgia. And it'll be a small number of voters within those states. What is striking about this campaign is how few people are actually changing their minds. And look at the conventions. Typically, conventions in the past, if you got a really good convention, you could get a bump of 5, 6, 7 points in the polls. In recent elections, it's been more like 1 or 2%. This election doesn't seem like there was any bump at all. So there's so many people who are so decided. So the small number of people who can actually be persuaded to change their minds on this, who are undecided between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, are a very strange beast. Maybe some of them can be turned on the issues, things like abortion, things like immigration, things like inflation, things like foreign policy. Maybe. I think a lot of it's going to come down to more things like, oh, I'm tired of this. This is boring. Let's see what else is on. You can see them attempting in their rhetoric, the Democrats in particular, trying to figure out what's the psychographic profile of somebody who could actually be undecided between these two candidates. So we can have all these discussions about the issues, and they matter to some voters somewhere. I don't think they're going to be decisive, frankly.
Well, clearly China is something that the former President Trump has put on the agenda as an important thing that has garnered a lot of enthusiasm. The border is another one. COVID might be another one. He's got his list. Do you think at the end of the day that's dispositive for the outcome?
I think that what will determine the outcome is whether or not the parties are able to get those tens of millions of Americans who, generally speaking, don't bother to go out and vote because the election will ride on so few votes, just as Andrew has said. It makes a huge difference whether or not the on-the-ground games of both the Republicans and the Democrats are able to generate that voter turnout, in particular in those battleground states.
We should just say, you mentioned 7 states. It's a country of 330 million people. It will come down to fewer than 100,000 votes.
That's right.
Out of 330 million.
It's exactly 75,000. It's exactly 75,000 according to the Trump campaign. They need 75,000 votes to win.
Is he looking for them the same way he looked for the 16,000 votes in Georgia? No, never mind that. Never mind. Vivian, let me try this with you. Normally, a candidate has a year or 2 to introduce themselves to the electorate when they are, at the top of a ticket for a major party. Kamala Harris basically has 3 months. Is that an asset or a liability?
Both, really. It could play in her favor in the sense that, she has less time to make gaffes and less time to really, put herself out there in a way that kind of turns people off. They get tired of seeing these people on TV campaigning, begging for votes, for years at a time. At the same time, we are still at a stage, even though she is the vice president of the United States, we are still at a stage, again, 56 days before the election, where there are a lot of voters who still just don't really know what she stands for, what her policies are. And, there are some people who may see her and just like her better than Donald Trump. Anyone is better than Donald Trump. And there is a sense of relief among Democrats that Joe Biden stepped down, because there was, a growing realization that he probably could not have taken Donald Trump on successfully. And so there is that bit of relief. But she does still remain an enigma to a lot of people in this country. And when I travel around, that's the one thing that I hear from people over and over again is, not really clear where she stands on policy X. Well, that's really where the short time that she has to campaign works against her, and that's really the opportunity that she has on Tuesday night to put her policies out there and really help American people understand how she will improve their lives if she is elected as president.
We'll talk debate strategy in a moment, but on that issue of asset or liability to be better or lesser known, Andrew, what do you think?
Well, she benefited in the early going when she first took over from low expectations. She was not regarded as being a great success as vice president. I'm not sure who is regarded as vice president. It's such a non-entity of a job, but it was striking when people were talking about should Biden step down and the speculation about who should replace him. People looked right past her initially. They talked about Gavin Newsom. They talked about Gretchen Whitmer. But once she took over, and Biden, of course, helped a great deal with his blessing upon her, but hasn't put a foot wrong in my view. She's looked presidential. She's looked in charge. She's made a series of good decisions, including her choice of VP pick. So I think that she got a bump out of that. Making further yards, I agree. There's still, for those voters who can be reached, there are still some who aren't sure what to make of her, have heard she's too far left, she's a San Francisco liberal, et cetera. You can see she's been working hard to overcome that impression, including renouncing some of her previous positions from 4 years ago. Things change in 4 years. But she's been working hard to go after those centrist voters and those moderate Republicans, or even conservative Republicans. It's now got Dick Cheney's endorsement.
Yes, and Liz.
Who are reachable because they're so appalled by Trump in personal terms.
As you look at the changes she's made, I mean, there's the old expression, where you stand depends on where you sit. Yeah. At the moment, she sits in a different job than she had just a couple of months ago. Do you think voters indulge that kind of change of position on something as important as fracking in Pennsylvania?
I think so. I mean, I would put the policy issues relatively lower in importance than her ability to articulate a particular vision for the future of the United States. And in that sense, it seems to me that she has done a great job in putting out a vision that is substantially different than Mr. Trump's vision, which is a highly negative vision of the United States.
Vivian, one of the reasons that we're very glad to have you on the program tonight is because we need somebody who's at the heart of things in the States to explain to a Canadian audience how it is, and Andrew gave a bit of a checklist earlier, how it is a guy who's, a narcissistic, sociopathic, sexual assailant with authoritarian tendencies, how he has such a massively loyal following in the United States, people who will absolutely go to that wall with Mexico for him, who even has his former vice president saying he's not fit to be president. How has he managed to remain such a popular option?
One of Donald Trump's superpowers is his ability to stay on message with regard to election interferences and his claims that the election was rigged. He was, in fact, all weekend on Twitter and on Truth Social, his own social media website, insisting that he was going to incarcerate those who participated in, quote, cheating in the 2020 election. And he has, because of the repetition and because of the fact that he is adamantly and devotedly stuck to this message, he has managed to convince his base, his loyal followers, that the system is rigged against him and that the elections were essentially stolen from him. And you go to his rallies, and this is the first thing that you hear from people all over the country who are Trump loyalists, is that he had the election stolen from him and Biden is an illegitimate president. And so that has basically been, to many of us who cover him day and night, it is a bit of an enigma. But that is really the biggest takeaway, is that he's been so on message on this and insisted and been adamant about it so much. And he has rallied his supporters and he has rallied the party behind this. Now, there are a lot of Republicans who are very skittish about the whole entire claim that Biden didn't legitimately win the election, but there are enough who have said that they support him in this. And so it's a hard thing then to come and try to convince people otherwise. We, whether or not it's through the courts or through top officials in these states, you mentioned Georgia a few minutes ago, we have consistently pointed to that as evidence that the election was not stolen from him, but his followers choose to believe him. And so that is really the biggest takeaway.
Andrew, that's the thing. He went to court 60 times trying to get the election results overthrown, lost every case, and yet he's kept his coalition intact. How?
The facts don't matter either to him or to his followers, I think would be the shorthand. You've got two things. One is, I'll differ slightly with our guest here, that I think his superpower is an absence of shame. It makes it impossible for us in the media to cover him, for one thing. There's a script to these things. If you behave as badly as he has every single day in so many ways, things that any one of which would have ended any previous career, if you just simply shrug it off and don't care, we don't know how to respond to that. There's a script you're supposed to follow where you look ashamed and we chase you down and then you stutter and then you drop out of the race. He doesn't do that. So that's on the one hand, him. On the other hand, you've got a base of followers who are so alienated from mainstream America, from the institutions and conducts and norms of normal politics, of normal institutional governance of the country, who feel themselves so shut out from it for good reasons and bad, who feel they're being looked down upon, who feel they don't have social capital, et cetera, who think the Eastern elites are looking down their noses at them, that he's able to tap into that. And that predates Trump. That's been a problem for decades in America, but he has seized upon that and exploited that to a greater extent than any previous candidate.
Kim, I should set up my, follow-up question to you on this by saying I spent a bit of time in Northern Ontario over the summer. There were a lot of guests from the States that came through the place I was hanging out. Talked to a lot of them about why they supported Trump, as almost every single one of them did. An answer that they frequently come back to is, we can't stand how woke the Democratic Party is. They look down at us.
Yeah.
They don't like the fact that we're religious. They want to take our guns away. Can people ignore all they don't like about Trump? Well, I guess they are, if they think the Democratic Party's no better.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that one of the difficulties with the election at this point is the fact that there aren't many minds to be changed. And when one looks at Trump and his so-called superpowers, I think that there are a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. One of the superpowers, apart from those powers that Vivian and Andrew have talked about, one of the superpowers is the ability to subvert the Republican Party and to change it and to keep all of those elected Republicans absolutely along with the base. Because let's face it, if you think about the Republican Party and think about the possibility that every one of them would be like Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger, would Donald Trump be anywhere at this point? Because his base, no matter how loyal, isn't that big. And so that had the Republican Party elected officials eliminated him, as they absolutely could have, where would he be? A third-party independent candidate at the best.
Well, this Republican Party wouldn't be good enough for Ronald Reagan. I mean, he would not have a place in this Republican Party, fair to say?
I think it's entirely fair to say, certainly in terms of both in terms of policies and in terms of his persona. I mean, Reagan was sunny optimism, morning in America, there's nothing America can't do. You'll notice the Democrats have been appropriating that message because the Republicans have given it to them. On freedom, on patriotism, on optimism, all those kind of Reaganite themes. You saw a lot more of that at the Democratic convention than you did at the Republican.
Vivian, I want to circle back with you to, and apologies for doing this, I'm going to quote the New York Times, which is a bit cheeky to a journalist from the Wall Street Journal. But here we go. You know, Nicholas Kristof's a great columnist, and here's what he had to say in the New York Times last week when he said, too often since 2016, the liberal impulse has been to demonize anyone at all sympathetic to Donald Trump as a racist and bigot. This has been politically foolish, for it's difficult to win votes from people you're disparaging. It has also seemed to me morally offensive, particularly when well-educated and successful elites are scorning disadvantaged working-class Americans who have been left behind economically and socially, and in many cases are dying young. They deserve empathy, not insults. By all means, denounce Trump, but don't stereotype and belittle the nearly half of Americans who have sided with him. Okay, do you think there's some good advice in that column?
Of course. After the 2016 election where, many people had presumed that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and many of the polls were suggesting as much, and Donald Trump pulled off his win, there was really a come to Jesus moment for the media, for, the American society as a whole to understand how his victory happened. And a lot of it was exactly what Christoph explains there, that it is this sense that there's a large segment of the American population that is forgotten. And the Democrats are associated with this coastal elitism that many working class sort of in the middle of the country feel completely disconnected from, and they feel like they've been forgotten. An example being, I was just with Trump in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, an old industrial town that is quite charming. And if anyone's ever passing through Pennsylvania, I highly recommend that you stop there. It is geographically gorgeous. The buildings are, Victorian style and beautiful, but many of them are abandoned. The city is overrun by crime, and it's in a sad state. And Trump went out there and gave a boisterous rally, where he talked about essentially how Democrats had forgotten them. And whether or not it's a Democrat problem or a Republican problem, the fact of the matter is, politics. Washington has forgotten segments of the country that, 20, 30 years ago were still sort of in their heyday and today are largely abandoned. And so Trump has spoken to those people because he wanted to be the outsider. And of course, ironically, he's no longer really an outsider. He runs the RNC, the Republican National Committee, but he put himself out there as an outsider who understands the needs of these people. Ironic again, because he's a wealthy New Yorker who was born into wealth, but his sort of dismissal of Washington politics and the politicians who have traditionally run this country, his ability to kind of shake things up, his completely apolitical, or sorry, unapologetic, attacks on people in Washington, that really resonated with people across the country. And it continues to resonate with them because they feel like he is fighting for them. And so for us to ignore that is a mistake. And I hope and I believe that we go into this cycle a lot more aware of those issues than we were certainly in 2016.
Andrew, your reaction to that Christoph column?
I differ with him on two major respects. One is the data on this is pretty clear. It's not the disadvantaged and the dispossessed that are predominantly supporting Trump. When you look through the data, it's the Trump supporter may be less wealthy than your average Republican, but they're more wealthy than your average American. When you look into the disadvantaged areas that are supporting him, it tends to be the wealthier people in those communities who tend to support him. So it's not about the economy, it's about culture, it's about respect. So that in that respect, I agree. People looking down their noses, et cetera. That is true, but it's not so much economically based as it is culturally based. The other thing is, no, you don't have to be a racist or a sexist or et cetera, to support Donald Trump. You sure have to be willing to look the other way at his racism and sexism. You have to be okay with that because you rationalize it in some way, that you can have a serial sexual abuser, not just a misogynist, but somebody who physically mistreats women in the Oval Office. You have to be prepared to look the other way at a lot of these things. And it's not as if he's a surprise to you or an unknown quantity to you. You've seen him displaying these tendencies every day now for 8 years. At some point, an error of that kind becomes a culpable error, becomes a moral error, in my opinion.
How did we get to a point in the United States, though, Kim, where character doesn't matter anymore? At least it certainly doesn't matter for this candidate who heads the Republican Party. It may matter for a lot of other people running for office, but not for him.
Absolutely, and that indeed is one of his superpowers connected to the shamelessness, but it also is very much connected to his celebrity. And we need, I think, to think about the way in which Americans have tended to look at celebrity and how they're willing to overlook a number of things. I think also in the case of Trump, what we see is a nice example of cognitive dissonance. People who supported him in 2016 for a variety of reasons can't literally bring themselves to admit that they were wrong in 2020 and in 2024, even though I am sure that in their heart of hearts, many, many Trump voters understand what they're doing when they're voting for someone like this.
Well, tomorrow night is the big debate, and we need to spend a few minutes here just talking about what the two main candidates need to get done in that debate. Amazingly enough, Vivian, these two have never met before. Harris and Trump have never met. They will meet on the debate stage for the first time tomorrow. Let's do a primer. What does Kamala Harris need to do tomorrow night to be successful?
Well, first of all, she needs to define herself. We were talking about that earlier. She really needs to help the American people understand who she is, sort of independent of Joe Biden. And that's something that, by the way, Trump is going to be trying to do as well. And something he's been trying to do since she entered the race is define her before she had the chance to do so. And so there's going to be that effort where he's going to be calling her a Marxist and she's going to be pushing back and trying to tell people, you know, what she really stands for, things like that. But then, of course, you know, it's television, and at the end of the day, when it comes to these debates, a lot of these issues just boil down to having that moment, that sort of viral moment where you have, you know, someone says something that's catchy and that gets replayed over and over again. She had one of those moments in the vice presidential debates in 2020 when she told then Vice President Mike Pence, you know, I'm speaking, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking, and she really, you know, garnered a lot of support and enthusiasm from that moment. And so those tend to be something that stands out and helps a candidate, just like a moment that goes the opposite way and kind of hurts a candidate. And Joe Biden had a few of those moments in June. You know, those could also really, you know, work against a candidate. And so I'm sure a lot of your audience has been following. There's been a lot of drama with the rules of this debate, but we have finally settled, both campaigns have finally settled, albeit reluctantly, on mics being off when the person is speaking, the same when the other person is speaking, the same rules that applied in the June debate. The Harris campaign was not happy with this and tried to reverse that, hoping that perhaps they could kind of poke Trump to act erratically and start going on the attack. They were not successful in that. So we're going to have the same rules with the mics off. So that kind of sets the mood a little bit for a little bit more discipline.
And Andrew, the Trump challenge for tomorrow night, how do you see it?
Well, I imagine he will be trying to, I mean, his handlers will have a playbook they would like him to follow, which is look cheerful, look like a uniter rather than a divider, all kinds of things that you would give to a conventional presidential candidate. He won't follow any of that. The question will be what degree does he ignore them? What he will want to do, I'm not even sure if it would be a deliberate strategy, but just the way he is annihilate all rules or standards by which you are normally judged. So a torrent of lies, a torrent of falsehoods, insults, et cetera, all the things that you're usually coached not to do. But if you do them sufficiently, it blows past any record keeping, any standard keeping. If you just show you don't care, then you're going to cheer up your audience. You're going to get your guys thinking, yeah, he's our guy. She's got to try and depress those people. She's got to play to his psychological insecurities, make him look foolish, make him look ridiculous, make him look old, make him look boring. That's the kind of thing that if it affects anything, if this debate has any effect, it can maybe depress some of his turnout.
With just a couple of minutes left here, Kim, let me try this with you. To the outside world, I think it's fair to say, including to many people here in Canada, there is a tendency to look at what's happening south of the border as, frankly, a kind of a reality freak show. It does get kind of crazy from time to time. Can you speak to the perils of viewing it that way?
Absolutely, given the fact that if American voters in November don't vote for Kamala Harris, if they give the Republicans not only the White House, but also the Senate and the House of Representatives, the impact on the United States, on the Republic, on the rule of law, on American politics will be huge. the impact on the globe, and in particular, the impact on American foreign policy is going to be absolutely huge. And if we sit back here and just simply dismiss this as sort of, a reality show, we're going to lose sight of the huge impact that this election is going to have on lives not only in the United States, but outside the U.S. as well.
I have heard the analogy. It's like a train wreck. You can't look away, even though you know it's not good. Anyways, I want to thank all three of you for coming on to TVO tonight and sharing your views on what is just an astonishing time in U.S. presidential history. Vivian Salaman, national politics reporter at the Wall Street Journal, we thank you for joining us from the American capital city. Kim Nossel and Andrew Coyne here in our studio in the Big Smoke. Thanks, everybody.
Municipalities provide a lot of services we all use, but increasing pressures have made it fiscally challenging for them to deliver these services, which affect healthcare, businesses, and public safety. To explore what can be done to get Ontario's prosperity back on track, we welcome Daniel Tish, the President and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce; Cameron Love, the President and CEO of the Ottawa Hospital; and Nishan Duryappa, the Chief of Police for Peel Regional Police. Please put your hands together for these three. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
We've got about 45 minutes for this conversation, and we've got lots to get to. But I wanted to start off by checking into your worlds. Cameron, if you can get us started, can you give us a sense within the hospital sector?
Yeah, so I mean, we still have our challenges within healthcare, within the hospital sector. And I think it's really more of a discussion around capacity and wait time. We're pretty fortunate in Ontario, actually we're fortunate in Canada, that the healthcare system as it's structured within hospitals, the quality of care and the ability to deliver care is really strong. Like we function exceptionally well. Our challenge is the time and access. And that is really a capacity discussion.
I want to just interject because fortunate,
yeah.
I'm not sure if that's the word that a lot of people would use to describe public health care in this province across the country.
Yeah, it's a fair comment, I think. I mean, you can compare a lot to other countries, but if I look, and this isn't an issue just that's cropped up in the last year and a half or post the pandemic, it has been building probably for a better part of a decade or two. And so when we look at things like access to emergency care, access to surgical care, once you're in, the care that's provided is excellent. The whole focus of what we're trying to do is to reshape and remodel healthcare to improve access. So whether you need surgery, whether you need an emergency department, whether you need an inpatient bed, whether you need access to long-term care, it's how do you remodel that to build greater capacity to improve access. And that is probably the biggest issue, the biggest concern is access in this province to healthcare and the time it takes to get to it.
And Chief, how is this impacting your sector?
So if you look at the dynamics in public safety, or particularly in policing, the police sector, post George Floyd in the last 3 or 4 years, I would dare to say that public safety is a number one concern for almost every municipality, small, rural, urban, and the narrative has really switched around. So the challenges that we're facing are how do you do that in a way that evolves with the changing dynamics and pressures and the confluence of issues that are not necessarily crime related, but social disorder related, that ends up on the doorsteps of emergency first responders on a day-to-day basis, which is one of the critical discussions Cameron and I have had, and obviously Daniel too in the business community, is there is an interwoven dependency on each other. Yep. To mitigate some of these issues.
I'm glad you brought that point up because your sectors may seem very different, but they actually rely on each other to create healthy communities. And Daniel, you've written a report on the economic outlook for the business sector. And one of the key findings was that confidence in the economy has dropped to a record low. Why is confidence so low?
Well, in some ways, it's not surprising when you look at businesses and what they've been through, especially small businesses in the last few years, right? I mean, coming out of the pandemic, they emerged with major disruptions in their supply chains, major disruptions in their customer traffic coming into their establishments, especially at the local level. high debt loads, a mental health crisis that small businesses are not prepared to deal with, and continuing concerns around the broader environment. You know, the stuff we were just literally talking about, healthcare in the community, housing in the community, safety in the community, you know, connecting as well to the addictions and substance use crisis. We did a report on that earlier this year. So when you add it all up, yeah, I mean, it's pretty grim. So just to give you a perspective, at the height of the pandemic, business confidence in Ontario's economic outlook was 29%. This year, it's 13. Small business, 12. Businesses in health and social services or health and social service providers, just 8%. Now, there's one bit of good news. And the good news is that when you ask them, are you confident in Ontario's economic outlook? They say no. If you say, are you confident in yourself and in your own business? They say yes. 48% say, I'm confident in my own outlook, so that's a massive difference. And a majority actually believe they're going to grow this year. And so in some ways, I think as public policy makers, folks in this room, the challenge that you have and we have together is to get businesses to invest on and act in their belief in themselves.
I think you kind of touched a little bit on how businesses are impacted by people who are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get a better understanding of how those challenges at the municipal level affect each of your sectors. And Cameron, if you could start us off, please.
Yeah, so unfortunately, since the pandemic, we've seen significant challenges with homelessness. And we've had this issue in the past, but it's really grown. And if I look at it from the hospital sector, I think in the absence of having strong collaboration with municipalities to build strength in terms of a system to support that population, in the absence of that, what tends to happen is everybody comes to the emerge department. And quite honestly, the emerge department is the last place where you want to support people that need that type of care. And it's not one element of care they require. It could be mental health, it could be addictions, it could be social aspects of care, it could be eye diseases, infectious diseases, it's a whole gamut of things. And so I think part of what we've been trying to work very closely with this municipality in Ottawa, and I think many are doing this across the province, is it really needs a system approach. There's not one thing that helps manage this population and helps them get back to a better place. And we had, as I said, we've seen significant growth. And again, part of it's capacity, but part of it is it's not just about a hospital. It's how do you take resources within a hospital, whether it's specialists or nurses or whatever, how do you partner with other community agencies to wrap an umbrella of services around to support that community.
So instead of operating in silos, to kind of collaborate.
Yep. And I think we've had pretty good success with that in Ottawa, Inner City Health, the Mission, the municipality, the hospitals have rallied around it. But I think we're seeing growth, and we're seeing, unfortunately, a greater instance of that. And we've got to wrap more resource, more capacity around it. Because coming to a hospital should not be the only place. If they do, we care for them, but the care they require is a lot more comprehensive. It tends to be needed in the community. And so what we tend to do is we treat them for their one specific in a hospital. We discharge in the community, but then if the support's not there, it becomes a vicious circle.
And I imagine, too, that takes away resources from people who are in the ER for medical emergencies.
Yeah.
And Chief?
Yeah, we see, obviously, the first line of sight to somebody that's sleeping in a, off-ramp, turnaround in a green space. The initial calls often come to us, but I know in Peel Region, and I have some of our team from Peel Region here, have done a remarkable job of providing the off-ramps and options for people. But precarious housing and homelessness is interwoven with so many other issues that we see, whether it be addictions, mental health. And so, the pressures for first responders, to Cameron's point, is a police officer or a paramedic the right person to be responding to somebody that has those demands? Unfortunately, we're the 24/7 go-to for these issues, and it often is on the doorstep of first responders. The ability, especially if we think about encampments, small or large, that many municipalities are feeling, is, it's on the heels of all the issues that we're seeing and nationally that are conflated with geopolitical issues. But is a police officer the right person to ask somebody to move into, secure housing or an off-ramp or to a hotel option? Probably not. But we have matured in our way that we are working with social service agencies or municipalities to find off-ramps in connection to services. So that is a big change that we've seen, as opposed to being like the big stick that is waved at people that are homeless.
And just to jump in, I mean, I totally agree with what my colleagues have just said, and how we need a systems-wide approach. And too often, part of the challenge that, we have 150 local chambers of commerce and boards of trade within our network, within our Ontario Chamber network. And business is too often left out of this conversation, right? Even yesterday, we heard very compelling speeches from a number of political leaders talking about this issue and saying correctly that municipalities are on the front lines, and which is a very challenging place to be, right? Because municipalities don't have the funding, to execute those responsibilities properly. But business is also on the front lines. Local business is on the front lines. And so they're investing more in security on their premises. They're investing in surveillance. They're investing in training for their staff for situations that really these staff shouldn't have to be dealing with, right? And of course, as a result of all this, there's a loss of customers and there's a loss of talent. So we've got to work together on this, because I think that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. We know it's integrated with the availability of mental health services. We know it's integrated with the concurrent building of homes, which is a big priority. And finally, we see all orders of government working together on that, which is incredibly healthy. But we need business to be part of that conversation.
We've been told that municipalities don't have enough resources.
Yeah.
Is this a chronic issue? Cameron?
Enough resources in municipalities? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the short answer would be yes. But to expand on that, I think there's two sides to this. There is always a need, and we've grown tremendously as regions and systems, and the demand and the population growth is greater than ever. And so by default, as populations grow in the healthcare environment, as the incidence of disease grows, you have to grow capacity, which means you got to invest in it. It's the same thing for police, it's the same thing for ambulance, it's the same thing for fire, it's the same thing for municipalities, because you build more capacity, you need more buildings, you need more housing, et cetera. So there's an element that there definitely needs to be funding that's put into it. I think the other thing that goes hand in hand with that, and I can only speak specifically to healthcare, what we can't do is to leave the system the same and keep putting money into it. There is a need to shift and change the system. If you look across healthcare across the entire world, call it the top 10 countries, not one of them has stayed stable in terms of the model of what they've implemented, because as they've changed the way models run, they make them more efficient, they drive value, but they improve access. And that's what we need to continue doing within healthcare. I think it's the same probably within municipalities. As we think about how we manage, to your previous question, the homeless population, what worked 10 years ago is not going to work 10 years going forward. Right. And so we've got to reorganize ourselves to some extent while you invest.
Yeah. And what worked well, and even I agree with you, and to go even further, what worked, how old is Canada? 160 something years, what worked 160 years ago doesn't work today, right? I mean, we still are dealing with a 19th century governance structure fundamentally for municipalities, being creatures of the province. And there's this very frustrating dance, which I know is frustrating to everybody here, and to business people watching, it's frustrating as well. It's that, there's a dance whereby municipalities every year go cap in hand to the government and say, we need this, we need that, and the government looks at it with good intentions. I don't want to suggest anyone's not, having the very best of intentions, but it's all about solving short-term problems and filling holes in this year's budget rather than fixing the system for the next generation. And it's interesting because I think we'll have an election at some point. We don't, in the next year or 2 years, we don't know. And the opposition parties will be talking about change, and the government will be talking about continuity, but also legacy, right? What's their legacy going to be? And I think there's an opportunity for all parties to get behind this idea, which we've heard about here at AMO, of a social and economic prosperity review, which we as an Ontario Chamber certainly support. And I think that it will be very constructive and in everyone's interest. This should not be a partisan issue. This should be a long-term issue about the competitiveness of our province and the prosperity of our province.
I was doing a panel yesterday on women's leadership, and one of the panelists mentioned that one of the concerns too is that when there is a change of government, then there's a change of priorities. And some of these funding issues, they have to be continued. You mentioned population growth. I'm going to come back to that in a little second, but I wanted to get your insights on, is it funding that is the issue, or the improper allocation of money towards various sectors?
Well, listen, I think it's not a zero-sum game. For example, there's nowhere in Ontario where they said, hey, the police got here too fast when I called them. That just does not happen. So I'm just using that as an illustration, is that...
We don't have to wait. The wait times are too short in the hospital.
That's right. So, to
But then
certain
there are wait times for ambulances that are too long, right?
There are in all sectors, I think there's a need for improvement. I do agree that systems need to change, without a doubt. And the growth of, particularly where I am in the GTA, the growth of population adds so much urban pressures to us that without a doubt, if you want to keep a community safe, it costs. But there is a need for, to Cameron's point, for systems to change. I think if you took, the chamber out of his title, healthcare out of his title, and policing out of mine, we'd be all saying the same thing. It's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, except expecting a different outcome. Without a doubt, we know in policing, and I can speak on behalf of my colleagues, that the shift in the model of how we serve the public has to change, but it's not without the absence of need for investment. Otherwise, you're compromising public safety, right?
Well, your sector is a sector that is known to have received a bump in its funding. Is funding enough to ensure that you can do your jobs?
Well, let me say this. Anywhere in Ontario, if you take the data for any of your municipal police agencies, 80% of the time a police officer is spending on the road is for non-criminal activity. It's mental health, addictions, precarious housing, food insecurity, older adult isolation, youth-related issues. Do any of those sound like a police-related issue? Minister Tabolo and I have chatted before. The only legislated person that can take somebody to a hospital in crisis is a police officer. And does that make sense? There are times where we need to be there. I only say that because other systems do need to be strengthened to alleviate the pressures on things like policing, fire, paramedics, or ER rooms, so we can get back to doing what we're supposed to be doing. So
it's interesting to say that because you essentially are saying what communities who are calling for the police to be defunded are saying. They're saying take some of the money that's going to the police and give it to other sectors in order for them to help people in need. So how do you balance those two things?
Yeah, so I've explained this many times in my region, is that to turn the tap down on public safety and turn the tap on something else immediately is impractical. The reality is people are still waiting on 911 for response, for calls. So that space needs to exist. But do I believe that other systems need to be strengthened so that there's less over-reliance on people like police officers or paramedics or firefighters? 100%. And I'm a full advocate for a pro-public health approach to public safety. If you took policing out of justice system and you put it with the healthcare system, can I tell you we would have a way better impact on people's needs in the community and be far more aligned. We'd be upstream versus being reactionary. So does it sound like I'm working my way out of a job? Kind of, but it's because we are spending our time, who hasn't had somebody's vehicle stolen, and carjackings, violent crimes are on the increase nationally, versus standing at a 7-Eleven for somebody who is sleeping in a vestibule and trying to get them to a social service entity for help versus responding to your house for an emergency. There's a different space that we should be in. And I'm with Cameron, Gary Kent, my CEO from the Region Appeal, and his amazing team are here. We talk about strengthening other systems so that we can get back to business, I think 100% that's the way to go.
I wanted to catch up on something that you said, Cameron, regarding population growth. Population of Ottawa has reached more than 1 million. How would something like that, population growth, impact a hospital?
Significantly, because there's two pieces to that. It's not just population growth, it's the age of the population. The highest demographic growth is typically 65 and 70 and over. And unfortunately, as you start hitting your 70s and into your 80s, the incidence of disease and the risk of healthcare issues climbs. And so what we see, and I'm going to couple the answer to this one with what Nish just said. And to your comment around the allocations, right, it's a tough question, but here's what I'd tell you is that everybody talks about we need an allocation move from one group to another without an expectation that we're going to change the way the system works. Right. And if I couple that to healthcare, what I'll tell you today is on any given day, 30% of the people that are admitted in our hospital and probably all the hospitals in Eastern Ontario are waiting for placement in the community. So should we just pick up all the money from the hospital and transfer it to the community? You could do that as an allocation, but you're not going to improve the system without changing the way the community system works and the hospital system. Part of this is if we can come up with a longer term plan where you're going to restructure healthcare, not what you do in the hospital versus what you do in the community, but what you do for populations, then you start to move the barometer of where people need to be cared for. You can get greater value because you provide more cost-effective care in the community than you can in a hospital, but you got to fundamentally change the system, and change is the hard piece because not everybody agrees. And so as you do that, what helps then is it takes the burden off of emergency departments. It changes what the police can do. It changes what the ambulance can do. So moving allocations to me is not the formula. Coming up with a plan on how we're going to remodel that allows you to invest in the right areas that gets you money out and allows the change is what we have to do. But it doesn't happen in 3 months.
Okay,
you need
I'm
a 3
going to
to
come
5
to
year
you,
term.
Daniel. But who would do that?
Well, I think what you need really comes down to leaders within the industry. You need governments in line, you need municipalities in line, and you need industry leaders, whether it's chiefs of police or CEOs of hospitals, but a willingness to change. What you can't do is expect everybody to keep everything the same and just keep pumping money into it. You got to change the way it's organized.
Yeah, just to jump in on that, it's not, again, we're in agreement here, you know, like it's not just about moving money around. It's not just about even necessarily the amount of money, right? It's about predictability, it's about growth, and I think it's about responsibilities, right? And I think those are the 3 things that we need to look at, right? So business is all about predictability, right? And there's a real threat to municipalities if municipalities continue to be as reliant as they are on non-residential sources of revenue, in effect business taxes, right? There's a threat to our ability to grow housing as fast as we want if municipalities continue to need to rely so heavily on development charges. But we understand why they do, right? You know, why they have to do both. Because they are they don't have predictability. They don't have the revenue sources that grow with the economy. Reliance on the property tax is not realistic, and the property tax reassessment is long overdue, and which is another problem. And then there's a matter of responsibilities. Municipalities are being asked to look at mental health, to look after addictions, to look after asylum seekers, to contribute, to ambulance costs and hospital building costs, and it's just not sustainable, right? I mean, just as a business proposition, it's not sustainable. So we have to work together on how we can structurally change this system so that it works for all of us. And if we do, the good news is, businesses will be attracted to places that all of a sudden are more competitive. We'll get more investment, we'll get more jobs, we'll get healthier, stronger communities.
In our final minutes, I really wanted to get there's a lot of influential people here, policymakers in the audience today. What's the one thing that you'd like to urge them to do, Chief? Maybe 30 seconds?
Okay, so I know this subject is fiscally sustainable, responsible municipalities. I just need to say public safety costs. And if you think that there's a way to round some corners off to find a way to do it, it's not the case. That being said, the service delivery model needs to change from a non-traditional to a pro-public health and a multi-sector approach. If your chief is not offering you that and also saying, hey, I need help with resourcing, then you're getting an unbalanced story.
Mm-hmm. Daniel?
Well, I guess I'd say, and I guess this is addressed to the political leaders in the room at the municipal level. Do what you do best. Campaign. You've got to campaign. You've got to, I think, achieve this very reasonable request of a social and economic prosperity review. But you have to be united in this. It can't just be, if this is only good for large municipalities but not small ones, only good for rural, not urban, that's not going to work. So it's got to be united. And I'd also suggest it should be positive. Reward political leaders at the other levels of government who sign on and say, yeah, this is needed and I want to be part of that change.
Cameron?
Yeah, great comments from two colleagues. The only other thing I'd add would be we made a lot of progress together as communities through the pandemic. We did a lot of things differently to deal with pretty catastrophic situation with some pretty impressive outcomes at the end of the day. But there's not a single sector that didn't change what they did and didn't be very innovative and creative that allowed us to deal with the situation. As soon as the pandemic's done, everything's gone back the way it was. What we need is municipalities and leaders in communities to really open thinking around how do we need to change and take what we learned from the pandemic moving forward, because there was a lot of things done well that can create that healthy community, particularly from a healthcare perspective.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I've learned a lot from you both. All. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. A round of applause for them. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is the agenda for Monday, September 9th, 2024. How can parents enroll their kids in recreational sports without breaking the bank? We'll find out more about that tomorrow. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Here's a look at something we're working on.
You got to stop the practice of using public money to create new disability barriers, because they've been doing that. This government's done it. The previous governments have done it. We've called them to account on this. And I would imagine everybody watching this interview is going to think, I don't want my tax dollars used to create new disability barriers, but they're doing it as we speak.
That's coming up on The Agenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.